Many blamed the Biden administration for the botched and chaotic military withdrawal from Afghanistan, in which 13 military members were killed. Now, a scathing report from the State Department, conveniently dropped Friday afternoon just before the 4th of July holiday weekend, backs that assessment. Now, according to the report, the Biden administration provided insufficient senior-level consideration of worst-case scenarios and how quickly those might follow. But President Biden has been consistently maintaining that no mistakes were made in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Will this latest report require the Biden administration to admit mistakes, or will the timing of the report, coming as it did on a Friday afternoon, as much of the official Washington press corps was preparing for a holiday, will it help them bury the story? Joining me to discuss it now is Congressman Rich McCormick. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Georgia. Congressman McCormick, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Now, first, I'd like to hear your response to what President Biden has said very consistently in the last week, that no mistakes were made in the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Well, that's ridiculous. Anybody who saw the fact that we lost more lives in one day than we lost in the last 10 years, that we lost control of a country that was stabilized, that we, after a $2 trillion investment with 20 years, with 2,461 lives lost, with brain injuries and limbs lost, times we spent away from our families, months and years at a time, to lose control of a country. And literally half the population is now in subjugate slavery. They have 27 terrorist cells training there. To say that that's not a botched withdrawal is literally a slap in the face of everybody who served there.
Now, according to this report, again released on Friday, just before the 4th of July, it said that there was, quote, insufficient senior level consideration of worst case scenarios. What do you take that to mean?
We already knew there were a lot of bad things happening there. There was dissenting opinions from some of the leaders there that were ignored. They didn't take into account the bad things that were already taken care of. We had really good intel from all over the nation that as soon as you start telling the bad guys that we're leaving, the peripheral police stations and stuff like that, they don't want to die. They're just trying to survive to the next generation. The fact that Biden said, hey, look, we're not going to stand up for them if they're not going to stand up for themselves. Well, come on. Who's been absorbing the brunt of these forces for the last decade? You've had tens of thousands of Afghanis die in defense of their country, patriots, people who would die for their country willingly if they thought it would make a difference. But once they no longer have the backing of the United States and they knew they were in trouble, then they're just going to hand over the keys to the Taliban and say, here, just don't kill us. Leave my family alone. And that's exactly what happened. We didn't prepare for that. We gave them the keys without even blinking an eye. We left behind almost $90 billion worth of military assets that can now be used against us in the future.
Now, if there was, in fact, insufficient senior level consideration of worst case scenarios, what do you think now? And we've had a lot of time to kind of reflect on this, hear from the Biden administration, let them explain their rationale. Why do you think the decisions that were made at the time were made in the way they were?
Because the president wanted to have a fit rep, to put in military terms, he wanted to be the president that got us out of Afghanistan. Well, congratulations, you did it, and in the worst possible way. I remember when Obama talked about getting out of Cuba, and he said, that was a presidential promise he made during his campaign. But once he started getting briefed up on it and realized that's a bad idea, having a strategic loss of a very important position just for the sake of saying, I got us out of Cuba, didn't make sense. So we're still in Cuba, because it makes sense to be in Cuba. It makes sense we should still be in Afghanistan. I know people didn't like it. They thought, we shouldn't be in a quagmire. We're all over the world right now. We're still in Spain. We never even fought a war in Spain. We have more people in Spain than we had when we had troops in Afghanistan in 2016, even when we started our withdrawal. We still have people in Germany, Korea, Japan, Italy, all over Africa. This is strategically placed troops to keep bad people from coming to America and doing bad things to Americans.
Now, this report I mentioned a couple of times was released Friday before the 4th of July. So big holiday weekend, a lot of people not paying attention to the news. That's when you typically dump news that you don't want anyone to know about. Do you think the timing of the release itself is an admission that the Biden administration, despite what we hear sometimes from Karine Jean-Pierre and President Biden, really isn't proud of the way that went?
News cycles matter, and of course it matters when they released it. Not only did they pick a Friday, but they also picked the Friday before the 4th of July weekend. They meant to do this. They wanted to get buried, and the media, of course, is always happy to comply with that when it has to do with liberals and covering up their mistakes. This is just another example of the biased media system, and if they have nothing to cover up, if they were trying to be totally transparent, they just be honest. They really messed this up.
Now, Congressman, what do you think accountability looks like in this case?
Well, first of all, they have to answer for what they did wrong. This is one of the things that we talked about in our hearing. The Foreign Affairs Committee had multiple hearings on this. And if you go back and review the testimonies, both on soldiers and sailors that served over there, of the Afghani refugees, of the people who deserted, quite frankly, people who put their lives on the line to help us in these efforts that we just left behind and didn't do anything for. The fact that we have to send over mercenaries to actually do the job of the military that we give very good resources to, very good intel for. We still have an accountability problem for what we did wrong, but also for what we have not yet accomplished. If we can't acknowledge what we did wrong, there's no healing process. It was funny. The one bipartisan thing we had at the hearings is like, we have to learn from our mistakes. Well, you can't learn from your mistakes if you don't admit to anything wrong. There was a ton of things we did wrong. You could even talk about the start of the war, but that's really neither here nor there. You have to admit what we did on the withdrawal, which really cost us not only American lives, but also cost us an amazing amount of prestige around the world.
Congressman, final question. In about 30 seconds, there are a lot of critics who say that the Afghanistan withdrawal was one of the things that encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine. Are you one of those?
I absolutely believe that it was instrumental. When you show weak leadership, when you show no commitment to your obligations, when it shows poor leadership, when it shows you as a weak nation not willing to stand up for what's right, of course it's going to embolden people like Putin, especially when you're a dictator who wants to expand your borders and do the wrong thing. When you don't think that the leadership has any backbone and that they're going to be ineffective, of course it's going to affect the decisions of bad players around the world.
Congressman Rich McCormick, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.